"Please, don't lift my dress," his maid begged. But the millionaire did, and froze at what he saw. Everything changed in the quiet glow of the kitchen. She thought it was just another night of cleaning, but when his hand reached for her dress, his eyes locked on a truth that shattered his world and hers. The mansion was wrapped in stillness, the kind of silence that made even the smallest sounds echo. From somewhere far down the hall, the faint ticking of the grandfather clock marked the passage of time, steady and unchanging. In the vast kitchen, Elizabeth Zoe stood barefoot on the cold tile floor. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only other sound. Her plain maid's uniform hung neatly over her slender frame, and her blonde hair was loosely tied back, a few strands falling over her cheeks. She worked carefully, placing a delicate porcelain cup on the counter. Steam curled up from the kettle as she poured water over the tea leaves, the rising aroma mingling with the faint scent of lemon she had sliced earlier. The warm light above the marble countertop cast a golden glow across the room, making the stainless steel appliances gleam like mirrors. Elizabeth had been working here for 3 months, yet she never allowed herself to grow comfortable. Her eyes were always down. Her voice, soft and quick, only answered when spoken to. She told herself it was safer this way, safer not to draw attention. But tonight, something in the air felt different. She didn't know why, only that a strange, unshakable feeling had settled deep inside her chest. As she reached for the honey jar, the faint creak of a floorboard behind her made her pause. She thought it was her imagination, until a deep, rich voice spoke. "Couldn't sleep?" Elizabeth froze, her heart leaping into her throat. The cup in her hand almost slipped from her fingers. She turned slowly, and there he was, Jackson Chase. Barefoot, in dark silk pajama pants and a fitted black shirt, his hair slightly tousled as though he'd just woken. The dim kitchen light softened the sharp angles of his jaw, but his blue eyes, intense and unreadable, watched her closely. It's for you, sir," she stammered, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound calm. "I thought you might—" Before she could finish, he stepped forward. His movements were slow, unhurried, but deliberate, and with each step her pulse quickened. The subtle scent of his cologne reached her first, clean, masculine, with a hint of cedar. It wrapped around her senses, making the air feel heavier. She swallowed hard, clutching the cup tighter. Something about being alone with him in the quiet of the night made her feel exposed. Yet she couldn't look away. He stopped only a few feet from her, his tall frame casting a faint shadow across the counter. "Tea at midnight?" he asked, his voice lower now, almost intimate. Elizabeth nodded quickly, her eyes darting back to the cup, as if focusing on her task would steady her heart. But the truth was, her hands were shaking. She wasn't sure if it was fear or something else. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft hiss of steam from the kettle. Jackson didn't look away. It was as if he was trying to read her, every flicker of her gaze, every twitch of her fingers. Elizabeth's lips parted slightly, but no words came. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly seen, and she wasn't sure if that terrified her or made her want to step even closer. Jackson didn't speak right away. He simply leaned against the counter, his tall frame relaxed, but his gaze sharp and unblinking. The silence between them stretched, heavy enough that Elizabeth felt it pressing against her chest. "I've seen you avoid me, Elizabeth," he said finally, his tone calm but curious. "Why?" Her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. She didn't dare meet his eyes. "I'm here to work, Mr. Chase, that's all," she said softly. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. In reality, she kept her distance because every time he looked at her, her heartbeat turned wild. Every time he entered a room, she forgot how to breathe. Jackson didn't respond right away. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that she could hear the faint sound of his breath. He reached up toward the high shelf above her head. The movement seemed harmless, but as his arm extended, his sleeve brushed her shoulder. It was only the lightest touch, but it sent a rush of heat up her spine. Her breath caught, and she hated that he noticed. "You flinch like I'm dangerous," he murmured, retrieving the jar from the shelf. Elizabeth forced herself to swallow, her throat suddenly dry. "You're my employer," she replied. "It's better to keep boundaries." His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, more like a hint of amusement mixed with something darker. "And yet here you are, alone with me, in the middle of the night." Her pulse jumped. "I didn't expect you to be awake," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He placed the jar down beside her but didn't move back. The space between them felt charged, as if the air itself had thickened. Elizabeth instinctively stepped backward, but her spine met the cold marble counter. She was trapped, not in a threatening way, but in a way that made her acutely aware of every inch between them. Jackson's eyes, those piercing blue eyes, held hers with quiet intensity. He wasn't looking at her uniform or her hands. He was looking directly into her, as if peeling back every layer she tried to hide. Her chest rose and fell quickly, the sound of her own breathing loud in her ears. She wasn't afraid of him, not truly. But there was something about his closeness that made her feel as though the world had shrunk to just this kitchen, just this moment, just him. And deep inside, she knew he wasn't merely curious about her. He wanted to know why she built walls, and maybe he wanted to be the one to break them. The jar Jackson had placed on the counter still sat unopened. Elizabeth's focus wasn't on it. It was on the way his nearness made her pulse race, and the sudden, unexpected touch that changed everything. As he shifted, his hand brushed lightly against the curve of her hip. It wasn't intentional, she could tell by the way he didn't linger. But for Elizabeth, it was enough to shatter the fragile calm she had been holding on to. Her breath caught. Her body stiffened. Memories she had buried deep threatened to claw their way back to the surface. Without thinking, the words spilled from her lips, trembling and raw. "Please, don't lift my dress." The moment the plea left her mouth, the air in the kitchen shifted. Jackson froze mid-motion, his eyes locking onto hers. He didn't move, didn't speak at first. But in his gaze there was something unexpected. Not offense, not confusion, but a flash of concern that was almost protective. The ticking of the clock in the hall felt louder now. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade beneath the pounding of her heart. "Elizabeth?" he said finally, his tone gentler than she had ever heard it. "Why would I do that?" She couldn't look at him. Her eyes dropped to the floor, her lashes shielding the vulnerability in her gaze. Her lips trembled before she spoke again, barely audible. "Because if you did, you'd see something I never wanted anyone to see." The confession hung between them, heavy and unspoken in its meaning. Jackson's brow furrowed slightly, not in anger, but in thought. He had seen fear before, fear that came from danger, from mistrust, but this was different. This was the fear of someone who had been wounded long before he ever walked into their life. He took a slow step closer, careful not to touch her again. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly, the depth in his voice pulling her eyes back to his. For the briefest moment, she thought she saw something in him. A man who understood what it was like to hide parts of yourself from the world. But Elizabeth's instinct to protect herself was strong. Her shoulders tightened, her fingers curling against the counter as though gripping it would keep her grounded. He didn't demand answers. He didn't try to joke or brush it off. He just stood there, his presence steady, like he was silently telling her, "You can trust me when you're ready." And though her mind screamed for her to step away, her heart whispered that maybe, just maybe, she wanted him to stay. Jackson's curiosity was burning, but it wasn't the shallow kind. It wasn't the curiosity of a man prying into gossip. It was the pull of someone who truly wanted to understand. He didn't reach for her. Instead, he moved slowly, lowering himself until his tall frame bent and his eyes were level with hers. From this close, she could see the small flecks of silver in his blue irises and the sincerity that made her chest ache. "You can tell me," he said quietly. "Not a demand, not a command, just an invitation." Elizabeth's throat tightened. Her fingers fidgeted at the hem of her skirt, the fabric trembling slightly from her unsteady hands. She wanted to turn away, to walk out of the kitchen, to keep her secret buried where no one could judge her for it. But there was something about the way he was looking at her. Like he wouldn't laugh, like he wouldn't flinch, like maybe, just maybe, he would understand. She drew in a shaky breath. Her heart was hammering so loudly, she wondered if he could hear it. Then, slowly, she lifted the hem of her dress, just enough to reveal the truth she had carried in silence for years. The faint light caught the uneven line of a jagged scar running across her thigh. It wasn't ugly in his eyes, though she had always believed it was. To her, it was the reason she no longer wore short dresses. The reason she avoided swimming pools and beaches. The reason she avoided people. Her voice cracked as she spoke. I was in a house fire when I was 18. I barely survived. Her gaze dropped again, shame heavy in her chest. People, they looked at me differently after that. My fiancé broke the engagement, said he couldn't handle it. She swallowed hard, fighting the sting in her eyes. I came here because I needed work, and I didn't want pity. I wanted to be invisible. For a long moment, Jackson didn't speak. She braced herself for the polite but awkward response she'd heard so many times before. I'm sorry, that must have been hard. But when he finally did speak, his voice was low, certain. You think a scar changes who you are? Elizabeth blinked, caught off guard. He wasn't looking at her thigh anymore. He was looking at her, really looking. Her lips trembled. It's all people see when they look at me. Not me, he said simply. There was no hesitation in his tone, no trace of pity, only a firm truth that sent warmth spreading through her chest. In that moment, she realized maybe her scars weren't the whole story. For a moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of the kitchen. Jackson's eyes held hers, searching, steady, unshaken by what she had shown him. Then, slowly, almost hesitantly, he reached forward. Elizabeth's breath caught, unsure if she should step back or let him close the space between them. His hand hovered for a second over her thigh, giving her every chance to stop him. But something deep inside her whispered, "Don't move." When his fingertips finally made contact, it wasn't like she expected. There was no quick withdrawal, no awkward glance away. Instead, his touch was gentle, careful, almost reverent. He traced the edge of the scar lightly, as though memorizing its shape. This, he said softly, his voice low and steady, tells a story of survival. Her lips parted, but no words came. No one had ever said that before. People had called it an accident, a tragedy, an unfortunate reminder, but never survival. Her lips parted, but no words came. No one had ever said that before. People had called it an accident, a tragedy, an unfortunate reminder, but never survival. You're stronger than you know, he added, his gaze never wavering. Elizabeth's eyes burned with sudden tears. She blinked quickly, but one escaped, trailing down her cheek. No one, not even her family, had touched that scar without a flicker of discomfort in their eyes. No one had ever called her strong for simply making it through. Jackson's hand moved away slowly, not because of disgust, but because he wanted her to know. He could touch her again if she wanted him to. Then he stood, tall and solid before her. His presence felt like a shield between her and every cruel word she had ever heard. You're beautiful, Elizabeth, he said, and there was no doubt, no hesitation in the way he said it. Every part of you. Her breath hitched again, this time for a different reason. He wasn't just talking about her face, or her hair, or her figure. He meant everything. The scars, the flaws, the pieces she thought made her unlovable. And I'm not letting you hide anymore. Something inside her cracked then, years of shame loosening their grip on her heart. She didn't step back. She didn't drop her gaze. Instead, she looked right at him, and for the first time in years, she believed maybe she was more than the girl with a scar. Elizabeth felt something inside her snap. Not like breaking from hurt, but like a heavy chain giving way after years of holding her down. It wasn't pain. It was relief. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her breaths uneven. A shaky laugh slipped out, surprising even herself. Tears rolled freely down her cheeks now, warm and unashamed. Jackson didn't look away from her. He didn't rush her or try to wipe her tears before she was ready. He simply stood close enough that she could feel his presence, strong, steady, and safe. Then his hands came up, framing her face gently. His thumbs brushed away a tear, his touch feather-light. You deserve someone who sees you, he said, his voice low but full of conviction, not just the parts you try to hide. Her lips trembled, her heart aching with the truth in his words. For so long, she had believed no one could look at her without seeing only the scar. And yet here he was, looking at her like she was the most beautiful thing in the room. The air between them shifted, warmer now, softer. She could feel his breath, smell the faint trace of tea and cedar. When he leaned in, it wasn't sudden. It was slow, giving her every chance to step away. But she didn't move. She didn't want to. His lips met hers in the middle of the quiet kitchen. The kiss was gentle at first, unhurried but full of meaning. It wasn't just affection, it was a promise. Elizabeth's hands found their way to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart under her fingertips. It was real, grounding her in the moment, reminding her this wasn't a dream. When they finally pulled back, she kept her eyes closed for a second longer, holding on to the warmth of the moment. Her voice came out as a whisper. "I don't feel broken anymore." Jackson's hand stayed at her cheek. "That's because you never were," he said softly. Her breath caught again, but this time it was from hope, not fear. In his presence, she didn't feel like the girl who had been abandoned after the fire. She felt like a woman who had survived, and who was finally being loved for all that she was. She thought about the people who had turned away before. She thought about all the times she had hidden herself just to avoid a glance of pity. And now she realized how wrong they all were, because real love doesn't turn away from scars. Real love sees them and stays anyway. The quiet hum of the kitchen wrapped around them like a blanket, the world outside feeling far away. She didn't need grand declarations or loud gestures. This moment, this truth, was enough. She smiled through her tears. "Thank you for not looking away." Jackson's lips curved in a small smile. "I'm not going anywhere, Elizabeth Zoe. Not now, not ever." And she believed him. Lesson for all. In a society that judges too quickly, whether by scars, appearances, or past mistakes, real love isn't found in perfection. It's found in acceptance. It's the courage to see someone fully, to hold them close, and to say, "You're enough." Because acceptance can heal wounds that time alone never could. And sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to see beyond the surface.